Mean Mommy. A novel by Miranda Sedini Schütz. Chapter 1. Amelia Chun stared at her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen. Another notification. Her stomach twisted into the familiar knot that had become her constant companion over the past few months. With a deep breath, she tapped on the message. Pathetic as usual today. Everyone was laughing at you behind your back. Her eyes burned, vision blurring as she fought back tears. Amelia glanced around the empty school hallway, relieved no one could see her like this. She clicked on the profile, anonymous, of course, just like all the others, and added it to her block list, which had grown to an impressive length. Not that blocking helped. They always came back with new accounts. Shoving her phone into her backpack, she slumped against the cool metal of her locker. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows, reminding her that she'd stayed at school far longer than necessary again. Anything to delay going home. Home. The word should have brought comfort, but lately, it had become just another place to feel isolated. Her father was rarely there, consumed by his work at the hospital. And her mother. Well, things with her mother had grown increasingly strained over the past year. Amelia pushed herself away from the locker and headed for the exit. The school was eerily quiet, most students having left hours ago. Only the distant sounds of the basketball team practicing in the gym broke the silence. Outside, the crisp October air bit at her cheeks. She pulled her jacket tighter and began the 20-minute walk home, deliberately taking the longer route through Oak Ridge Park. Anything to extend her time away. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Amelia hesitated before checking it, steeling herself for another cruel message. Instead, it was from her best friend, perhaps her only friend these days, Zoe. You okay? You disappeared after chem. Amelia typed a quick reply.
Yeah.
Just needed some air. Heading home now. Zoe's response was immediate. Call me later? Sure. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, guilt washing over her. She hadn't called Zoe in weeks, always making excuses. How could she explain what was happening when she barely understood it herself? The messages had started in August, just before the beginning of junior year. At first, they seemed like random trolling, unpleasant but not particularly targeted. But they had escalated quickly, becoming more personal, more cutting. Whoever was behind them knew things about her, her insecurities, her fears, things she'd only told a handful of people. They knew when she'd bombed a test or stumbled during a presentation. They even referenced conversations she'd had in private. Amelia had changed her usernames, created new accounts, even deleted her social media entirely at one point. Nothing worked. They always found her. The park was nearly empty as she followed the winding path past the duck pond. A few elderly couples sat on benches, enjoying the late afternoon sun. A mother pushed a toddler on the swings, their laughter carrying across the playground. Amelia watched them, a dull ache spreading through her chest. She remembered when her own mother used to take her to the park, back before everything changed. Before her father's promotion had him working 70-hour weeks. Before her mother's episodes of exhaustion had her locked in her bedroom for days. Before the drinking had started. Amelia's phone vibrated again. Another notification. Her hand trembled as she pulled out her phone. Those jeans make your thighs look massive. No wonder Jake never noticed you. Her breath caught in her throat. She'd worn new jeans today, ones she'd saved up for weeks to buy. And Jake Harrison had walked right past her in the hallway without so much as a glance, despite Zoe's insistence that he'd been asking about her. The message had been sent less than a minute ago. Amelia spun around, scanning the park. There were only the same elderly couples, the mother and child now leaving the playground, and a man walking his dog on the far side of the pond. No one was looking at her. No one was on their phone. But someone was watching her. Someone had been watching her for months. By the time she reached her house, the shadows had lengthened, and the temperature had dropped considerably. The two-story Victorian would have looked welcoming with its wraparound porch and large windows if not for the darkened rooms visible from the street. Amelia climbed the steps slowly, listening for any sound from inside. She unlocked the door and stepped into the foyer. "Mom," she called out, her voice echoing in the silence. No response. Her father was working the night shift at the hospital, so his absence was expected. Her mother, however, should have been home. Amelia dropped her backpack by the stairs and moved through the house, flipping on lights as she went. The kitchen was spotless, untouched since breakfast. A note on the refrigerator caught her eye, her mother's elegant handwriting instantly recognizable. "Meeting with my editor. Leftovers in the fridge. Don't wait up. Mom." Eleanor Chan, acclaimed author of psychological thrillers, was always either deeply immersed in writing or away at meetings, book signings, or writer retreats. Ever since her third novel had hit the bestseller list 2 years ago, she'd become increasingly absent from Amelia's life, physically and emotionally. Amelia opened the refrigerator and found a container of yesterday's stir-fry. She wasn't hungry, but she went through the motions of heating it up and sitting at the kitchen island to eat. The house creaked and settled around her, the silence broken only by the scrape of her fork against the plate. After dinner, she cleaned up and headed upstairs to her bedroom. The space should have been a sanctuary, with its pale blue walls and window seat overlooking the backyard, but even here, she felt exposed. Vulnerable. She changed into pajamas, then settled at her desk to tackle her homework, desperate for the distraction. Her phone remained ominously silent for the rest of the evening. Sometimes the absence of messages was almost worse than receiving them. It left her waiting, anxious, knowing they would eventually come. At 11, she finally called Zoe as promised. "Hey, stranger," Zoe answered on the second ring. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about me." "Sorry," Amelia said, curling up on her window seat. "It's been a long day." "More messages?" Amelia had told Zoe about the cyberbullying after the first month, when it became clear it wasn't going to stop. She hadn't shared the worst of the messages, though, or her growing fear that someone was physically following her.
"Yeah,
a couple. Did you tell your mom yet? Or your dad?" Amelia sighed. "Dad's never home, and Mom." She trailed off, unsure how to explain the growing distance between her and her mother. "She's busy with her new book." "You need to tell someone, Mel. This has been going on for months. It's serious." "I know." Amelia pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window. "I'll figure it out." They talked for another 20 minutes about safer topics, chemistry homework, the upcoming Halloween dance that Amelia had no intention of attending, Zoe's latest crush on a college freshman. By the time they hung up, Amelia felt slightly better, almost normal. She was brushing her teeth when she heard the front door open and close, followed by the familiar sound of keys being dropped into the ceramic bowl on the entryway table. Her mother was home. Amelia rinsed her mouth and hesitated, debating whether to go downstairs. Her relationship with her mother had become increasingly strained over the past year. Eleanor had always been intense, creative, passionate, with dramatic mood swings, but lately, there was something else. A brittleness. A coldness that hadn't been there before. Still, maybe Zoe was right. Maybe it was time to tell her about the messages. Amelia made her way downstairs. She found her mother in the kitchen, a glass of red wine already in hand, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. At 42, Eleanor Chin was still strikingly beautiful, with the same almond-shaped eyes and high cheekbones that Amelia had inherited. "You're still up," Eleanor said, not quite a question, not quite an accusation.
"Yeah."
Amelia lingered in the doorway. "How was your meeting?" "Productive." Eleanor took a long sip of wine. "Richard thinks we can push up the publication date for the new book. Apparently, there's a market opportunity with Halligan's book being delayed." She made air quotes with her free hand, her tone mocking. "That's good, right? It means I'll need to finish the revisions by the end of the month." Eleanor's gaze sharpened. "You look tired. Is everything okay?" The concern seemed genuine, a glimpse of the mother Amelia remembered from before. She took a deep breath. "Actually, there's something." Eleanor's phone chimed from where it sat on the counter. She glanced at it, her expression changing subtly. Hold that thought, sweetie. I need to answer this. She picked up the phone, turning slightly away as she typed a response. Amelia waited, the moment slipping away. When Eleanor looked back at her, the brief connection was gone, replaced by the distant, preoccupied expression that had become so familiar. You were saying? It's nothing, Amelia said quietly. Just school stuff. Nothing important. Eleanor studied her for a moment, then nodded. You should get some sleep. It's late.
Yeah.
Good night, Mom. Good night, Amelia. Amelia turned and headed back upstairs, the weight in her chest heavier than before. In her room, she closed the door and leaned against it, closing her eyes. The gulf between her and her mother seemed uncrossable now. Her phone pinged from where she'd left it on her nightstand. Amelia froze, a chill running down her spine. It was almost midnight. Who would be texting her now? Slowly, she crossed the room and picked up her phone. A new message notification flashed on the screen, from an unknown account. Her hands trembled as she opened it. She doesn't really care, does she? Your own mother can't even be bothered to listen. No one cares about you. No one ever will. Amelia dropped the phone as if it had burned her. The message had been sent less than a minute ago. Whoever was tormenting her had just seen her interaction with her mother. They were watching her. Inside her own home. She rushed to the window, looking out at the dark yard, the quiet street. Nothing moved in the shadows. No one was there. But someone knew. Someone had seen. Amelia backed away from the window, her heart pounding. For the first time, the fear outweighed the pain of the messages themselves. This wasn't just online harassment anymore. This was something much more sinister. She picked up her phone again, navigating to her recent calls to find Zoe's number. Her finger hovered over the call button, but she hesitated. What would she say? That she thought someone was spying on her through her windows? That they somehow knew about a conversation that had just happened in her kitchen? Zoe would think she was paranoid. Crazy. Instead, she opened her laptop and began what had become a nightly ritual, documenting the latest message in the spreadsheet she created to track them all. Date, time, platform, content, possible context. Looking at the growing list, patterns had begun to emerge. The messages often came after school, but also late at night. They referenced things that had happened that day, sometimes within hours or even minutes. They mentioned her clothes, her conversations, her movements. The messages were specific, personal, and increasingly cruel. Tonight's message was different, though. It crossed a line from targeting her insecurities to actively monitoring her home life. Amelia created a new column in her spreadsheet, evidence of surveillance. She had a sinking feeling it wouldn't be the last entry in that column. Sleep was impossible. Amelia lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, jumping at every creak of the old house settling. Around 2 a.m, she heard her mother's footsteps in the hallway, followed by the sound of her bedroom door closing. At least she wasn't alone in the house. Not that she felt any safer. When her alarm went off at 6, Amelia had managed perhaps an hour of fitful sleep. She dragged herself out of bed, going through the motions of her morning routine on autopilot. In the bathroom mirror, dark circles stood out starkly against her pale skin. She applied concealer liberally, knowing it wasn't enough to hide the evidence of her sleepless night. Downstairs, she found the kitchen empty, but a fresh pot of coffee had been brewed. Her mother was awake, but nowhere to be seen. Probably already shut away in her home office, working on her manuscript. Amelia grabbed a granola bar and filled a travel mug with coffee, adding plenty of milk and sugar to mask the bitter taste she hadn't yet acquired a taste for, despite drinking it regularly for the past year. She needed the caffeine to get through the day. She was about to leave when her mother appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in her usual work uniform of black leggings and an oversized sweater. Eleanor looked as tired as Amelia felt, her complexion sallow beneath her makeup. You're up early, Eleanor remarked, moving to the coffee pot. School project, Amelia lied. I need to meet my group before first period. Eleanor nodded absently, seemingly accepting this without question. I'll be working all day on the manuscript. My deadline's been moved up. She didn't look at Amelia as she spoke, focused on pouring her coffee. I've left money for pizza on the counter. Dad's working late again. Okay. Amelia adjusted her backpack strap. See you later, then. Eleanor turned, finally looking at her daughter. For a brief moment, something flickered in her eyes, concern, perhaps, or recognition of Amelia's exhaustion. But it was gone so quickly that Amelia wondered if she'd imagined it. Have a good day, Eleanor said, her tone neutral. Outside, the morning was gray and chilly, a fine mist hanging in the air. Amelia walked quickly, eyes scanning her surroundings constantly. The feeling of being watched had become overwhelming, making her jump at shadows and flinch at sudden movements. She was so distracted that she almost collided with someone at the corner of Maple and Elm. Whoa, careful there. A tall figure steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. Amelia looked up to find Jake Harrison looking down at her with a mixture of concern and amusement. Her heartbeat accelerated for entirely different reasons now. Sorry, she mumbled, stepping back. I wasn't looking where I was going. No worries, Jake said, falling into step beside her as they continued towards school. You okay? You seem kind of. He made a vague gesture with his hand. I'm fine, she said automatically. Just tired. Jake nodded, seemingly content with this explanation. They walked in silence for a moment before he spoke again. So, are you going to Chen's Halloween party next weekend? Amelia blinked in surprise. Ryan Chan, no relation, despite sharing her last name, was one of the most popular seniors, known for throwing legendary parties when his parents were out of town. Amelia had never been invited to one, nor had she expected to be. I didn't know I was invited, she admitted. Jake looked surprised. Everyone's invited. I thought Zoe would have told you. He shrugged. You should come. It'll be fun. Before Amelia could respond, his attention was diverted by a shout from across the street. Several of his friends were calling him over. Gotta run, he said. Think about the party, okay? With a quick smile, he jogged across the street, leaving Amelia staring after him in confusion. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. With a sense of dread, she pulled it out. He's only talking to you because he lost a bet. Ryan's party is on Saturday, not next weekend. Just another way to humiliate you. Amelia's chest tightened, her vision blurring with tears. She looked up, scanning the street frantically. Jake and his friends were already a block away. No one else was nearby, yet the message had come seconds after her conversation ended. She was being stalked. There was no other explanation. The realization should have terrified her, but instead, a strange calm settled over her. At least now she knew for certain. Now she could do something about it. By the time she reached school, Amelia had made a decision. She would find out who was behind the messages, no matter what it took. Chapter 2. You look like hell, Zoe said bluntly, sliding into the seat next to Amelia in the library during their shared free period. Thanks, Amelia replied dryly, not looking up from her laptop. Just what every girl wants to hear. I'm serious, Mel. Zoe lowered her voice, leaning closer. You're scaring me. When was the last time you slept? Amelia finally looked at her friend. Zoe's brown eyes were wide with concern behind her glasses, her freckled face pinched with worry. The guilt that had become Amelia's constant companion intensified. She'd been pushing away the one person who genuinely seemed to care. I'm fine, she said, softening her tone. Just stressed about midterms. Zoe's expression made it clear she wasn't buying it. Is it the messages? Are they getting worse? Amelia hesitated, then closed her laptop. Can we talk somewhere else? They found an empty classroom down the hall. Amelia closed the door behind them, then leaned against it, suddenly uncertain where to begin. You're really freaking me out now, Zoe said, perching on a desk. What's going on? I think someone's following me, Amelia said quietly. Watching me. Zoe's eyes widened. What do you mean? Amelia pulled out her phone and opened the document where she'd been keeping track of the messages. Look at the timestamps and what they reference. This one came just after I talked to Ms. Peterson about my paper. This one mentions the sweater I was wearing. I had just put it on minutes before because the classroom was cold. And this one, she scrolled down, came last night right after a conversation with my mom. Zoe took the phone, frowning as she scrolled through the messages. This is seriously messed up, Mel. Have you told anyone? Who would I tell? My dad's never home, and my mom. Amelia shook her head. She's barely present these days, even when she's physically in the house. What about the police? And tell them what? That I'm getting mean messages? They won't care. These aren't just mean messages, Zoe insisted, handing the phone back. This is harassment. Stalking, maybe. Amelia crossed her arms tightly across her chest. I need to figure out who it is first. Then I'll decide what to do. How are you going to do that? I don't know yet. But I'll figure it out. Amelia straightened, a determined set to her jaw. Whoever is doing this has made my life hell for months. They don't get to win. The bell rang, signaling the end of their free period. Zoe hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave the conversation unfinished. We'll talk more later, Amelia promised. I have calculus. Zoe nodded, but grabbed Amelia's arm as she turned to leave. Don't do anything stupid, okay? Whatever you're planning, don't do it alone. Amelia forced a smile. I won't. It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Zoe let her go, and Amelia hurried to her next class, her mind already racing with possibilities. Calculus passed in a blur, Amelia's exhaustion making it almost impossible to focus on derivatives and integrals. By the time the final bell rang, she had formulated the beginnings of a plan. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As she made her way through the crowded hallway, she spotted Jake Harrison at his locker. Taking a deep breath, she approached him. Hey, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Jake looked surprised but not displeased to see her. Hey, Amelia. What's up? About Ryan's party, she began, trying to sound casual. Was that this Saturday? I got confused about the date. Jake closed his locker, giving her his full attention.
Yeah.
This Saturday. His parents are out of town for some anniversary thing. He tilted his head, studying her. So, are you coming? Amelia hesitated. According to the anonymous message, Jake had only spoken to her because of a bet. But looking at him now, his expression open and interested, she couldn't reconcile that with the person standing before her. I might, she said finally. Zoe wants to go, so. Cool. Jake smiled, and Amelia's heart did a ridiculous little flip. I'll look for you there. As he walked away, Amelia stood frozen, processing what had just happened. Either the message had been lying about Jake, or he was a much better actor than she gave him credit for. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. With a sense of dread that had become all too familiar, she checked the screen. Playing detective now? Asking about the party? He's just being nice because he feels sorry for you. Everyone does. Amelia's head snapped up, eyes scanning the crowded hallway. Students rushed past in all directions, eager to leave for the day. Any one of them could have sent the message. Any one of them could be watching her right now. But something didn't add up. How had the messenger known she was going to ask Jake about the party? She hadn't planned it until moments before approaching him. Unless they really were following her. Watching her every move. The thought sent a chill down her spine. She hurried out of the building, constantly looking over her shoulder. The walk home had never felt so long or so exposed. The house was quiet when Amelia arrived. Her mother's car was in the driveway, but there was no sign of her downstairs. Working in her office, no doubt. Amelia set her backpack down in the kitchen and noticed a half-empty wine glass on the counter. Next to it was her mother's phone, forgotten in her rush to get back to work. Eleanor was fanatical about her writing schedule. Once she was in the flow, nothing could distract her. Amelia stared at the phone, an idea taking shape. Her mother's phone was almost always with her, guarded jealously. Eleanor claimed it was because she used the Notes app for sudden bursts of inspiration, but she'd grown increasingly secretive about it over the past year. Before she could second-guess herself, Amelia picked up the phone. The screen was dark, but when she pressed the home button, it lit up without requiring a passcode. Eleanor must have been using it recently and hadn't locked it yet. Amelia's heart pounded as she opened the Messages app. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, exactly, perhaps evidence that her mother had noticed something, that she was concerned about Amelia's increasingly withdrawn behavior. Or maybe communications with someone who might have a grudge against Amelia, someone who could be behind the harassment. What she found instead made her blood run cold. There, in a folder labeled Drafts, were dozens of messages. Messages identical in tone and content to the ones that had been tormenting her for months. That sweater makes you look even more flat-chested than usual. No one at that lunch table wanted you there. They were just too polite to say anything. He's only talking to you because he lost a bet. Amelia's hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the phone. It couldn't be. It made no sense. Why would her mother, her own mother, be sending these messages? She kept scrolling, disbelief warring with the mounting evidence before her eyes. Some messages were clearly drafts, incomplete or with multiple variations. Others were exact copies of messages she'd received. The sound of footsteps on the stairs jolted her back to reality. Quickly, she exited the app and placed the phone back exactly where she'd found it, then grabbed a glass from the cabinet and filled it with water, trying to calm her racing heart. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, looking distracted. "Oh, you're home," she said, as if surprised to find her daughter in their house. "Just got here," Amelia replied, amazed at how normal her voice sounded when her world was shattering around her. Eleanor crossed to the counter and picked up her wine glass, taking a sip before noticing her phone. "There it is," she murmured, more to herself than to Amelia. "I've been looking for this." "I think I'm going to Ryan Chen's party on Saturday," Amelia said suddenly, watching her mother's face carefully. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, her attention momentarily captured. "Ryan Chen? Isn't he the boy whose parents own the pharmaceutical company?"
Yeah.
"That's him. I didn't realize you two were friends." "We're not," Amelia said. "Everyone's invited. Jake Harrison told me about it." Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes, recognition, perhaps? Or calculation. "Jake Harrison," she repeated. "Is he your boyfriend?" "No," Amelia said, fighting to keep her tone casual. "Just a guy from school." Eleanor studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "Well, be careful. Those parties can get out of hand." She picked up her phone, checking it briefly before sliding it into her pocket. "I need to get back to work. There's money for pizza on the counter." "You already told me that this morning," Amelia said quietly. Eleanor paused, looking momentarily confused. "Did I? I must be more distracted than I realized." She offered a tight smile. "Deadlines. You know how it is." As her mother left the room, Amelia leaned heavily against the counter, her legs suddenly weak. The evidence was damning, but she still couldn't wrap her mind around it. Her mother, the woman who had once comforted her after nightmares, who had taught her to ride a bike, who had been her fiercest defender in elementary school when a teacher had accused her of cheating, was systematically destroying her self-esteem, her social life, her sense of safety. Why? The question echoed in her mind as she climbed the stairs to her room. There had to be an explanation. Maybe Eleanor's account had been hacked. Maybe someone was using her phone without her knowledge. Maybe. But deep down, Amelia knew. The messages were in her mother's voice, with her mother's particular brand of cutting insight. Eleanor Chan, best-selling author of psychological thrillers, knew exactly how to craft words that would wound most deeply. In her room, Amelia sat on the edge of her bed, numb with shock. Her phone pinged with a new notification, but she couldn't bring herself to look at it. Not yet. Instead, she reached for her laptop, opening a new document. She began to type, documenting everything she'd found on her mother's phone, every message she could remember receiving, every strange behavior she'd noticed in the past months. The words poured out of her, a torrent of pain and confusion and dawning rage. By the time she finished, the light outside her window had faded to dusk. Her fingers ached and her eyes burned, but she felt clearer than she had in months. She saved the document, then finally checked her phone. The new message seemed almost tame compared to her discovery. The party is a bad idea. You'll only embarrass yourself. Amelia stared at the words, a strange calm settling over her. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. Now, she was angry. Her mother wanted to play psychological games? Fine. But Eleanor Chan wasn't the only one who could craft a narrative. Chapter 3. The next morning, Amelia woke with a sense of purpose that had been missing for months. She showered and dressed with unusual care, applying makeup and styling her hair as she'd done before the harassment had begun, before she'd started trying to make herself invisible. When she entered the kitchen, her father was there, a rare sight on a weekday morning. Doctor. James Chun looked up from his coffee and tablet, his tired eyes brightening at the sight of his daughter. Morning, sweetheart, he said, setting down his mug. You look nice. Thanks, Dad. Amelia poured herself a bowl of cereal, studying her father. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deeper than she remembered. No surgeries today? Not until this afternoon. He smiled ruefully. Thought I'd try to catch up on some sleep, but my body clock had other ideas. Amelia sat across from him, a sudden lump in her throat. When was the last time they'd had a real conversation? Dad, she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. Do you think Mom is okay? James's expression shifted, a flicker of concern crossing his face before he masked it with a reassuring smile. What do you mean? She seems different lately. Distant. Almost like she's not really here, even when she is. Her father sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. Your mother's under a lot of pressure with this new book. The publishing industry can be brutal. He paused, studying Amelia with a doctor's clinical eye. But that's not really your concern. You look tired, Amelia. Are you sleeping okay? The irony of his concern after months of being essentially absent wasn't lost on Amelia, but she bit back the bitter response that rose to her lips. I'm fine, she said instead. Just busy with school. James nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. I know I haven't been around much lately. This new position at the hospital. He trailed off, his expression apologetic. But things should settle down soon. We'll take a family vacation once your mother's book is done. Maybe go back to Maui, like we did when you were 12. Remember how much you loved snorkeling? That was before Mom was afraid of the ocean, Amelia pointed out. James looked surprised. What do you mean? She won't go in the water anymore. Not since her second book was published. Amelia frowned. Don't you remember? Last summer at the lake house, she wouldn't even wade in past her ankles. Her father's confusion was evident, but before he could respond, Eleanor appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her work clothes, her hair pulled back severely from her face. James, she said, sounding surprised. I thought you'd be at the hospital by now. Morning meeting was cancelled, he replied, rising to pour her a cup of coffee. Rare chance to have breakfast with my two favorite women. Eleanor accepted the mug with a distracted smile, her gaze sliding over to Amelia. You're dressed up, she observed, a note of something unidentifiable in her voice. Special occasion? Just felt like it, Amelia replied, meeting her mother's eyes steadily. Something passed between them, a silent current of tension that James seemed oblivious to as he chatted about hospital politics and an interesting case he was consulting on. I should get to school, Amelia said finally, rising to put her bowl in the sink. Big chemistry test today. Good luck, her father said warmly. You'll ace it, I'm sure. Eleanor said nothing, just watched her with that unsettling, assessing gaze. As Amelia left the room, she felt her mother's eyes following her, like physical pressure against her back. Her phone remained silent during her walk to school, no new messages appearing. The reprieve should have been a relief, but instead, it left Amelia on edge, waiting for the next attack. But it didn't come. Not during her morning classes, not during lunch, not during the dreaded chemistry test, which she did, in fact, feel confident about, despite her disrupted sleep and emotional turmoil. By the time the final bell rang, the silence from her tormentor had become more unnerving than the messages themselves. You look better today, Zoe commented as they walked to her car. Zoe was one of the few juniors with her own vehicle, a battered Honda Civic that had once belonged to her older brother. Still not great, but better. Thanks, I think, Amelia replied with a faint smile. Can you give me a ride home? Sure. Everything okay? Amelia waited until they were in the car, doors closed against potential eavesdroppers, before responding. I found out who's been sending the messages. Zoe's head whipped around so fast Amelia was concerned for her neck. What? Who? How? I can't tell you yet, Amelia said, the words bitter in her mouth. I need to be absolutely certain, and I need to figure out what to do about it. Mel, you can't just drop a bomb like that and then clam up, Zoe protested, starting the car. At least tell me how you found out. Amelia stared out the window, watching the familiar streets pass by. I saw messages on someone's phone, she said finally. Drafts of messages identical to ones I've received. Zoe was silent for a moment, processing this. So it's someone you know, she said slowly. Someone close to you. Amelia didn't confirm or deny, but her silence was answer enough. Oh, Mel, Zoe said softly, reaching over to squeeze her hand briefly. I'm so sorry. The simple compassion in her friend's voice nearly broke Amelia's composure. She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. I need to be sure, she repeated. And then I need a plan. We need a plan, Zoe corrected firmly. Whatever this is, you're not facing it alone. They pulled up in front of Amelia's house. To her relief, her mother's car was gone, probably at a meeting with her editor or at her favorite cafe, where she sometimes went to write when she needed a change of scenery. Do you want me to come in? Zoe asked. We could start working on that plan. Amelia hesitated, then nodded.
Yeah.
Actually, I could use your help with something. Inside, they went straight to Amelia's room. Zoe dropped her backpack on the floor and flopped onto the bed, watching as Amelia paced back and forth. Okay, spill, Zoe said finally. What's the plan? I need to set a trap, Amelia said, stopping by the window. I need to catch them, catch her, in the act. So there's no possibility of denial. Her? Zoe's eyes widened. Wait, are you saying? I need absolute proof, Amelia cut her off. And I think I know how to get it. She outlined her plan while Zoe listened, her expression growing increasingly concerned. That's intense, Zoe said when Amelia finished. Are you sure about this? Maybe we should tell your dad first, or go to the police. With what evidence? Screenshots of anonymous messages and my word that I saw drafts on a phone? They'll say it could have been anyone, that I'm overreacting. Amelia shook her head. No, I need to catch her red-handed. Then no one can deny what's happening. Zoe looked unconvinced, but nodded reluctantly. Okay. What do you need me to do? First, I need you to help me set up a fake social media account. Something that looks legit, but isn't connected to me in any way. I can do that, Zoe said, pulling out her laptop. But what's the point? Because, Amelia said grimly, we're going to start spreading some very specific rumors. Rumors that only someone who's watching me closely would know to use against me. Zoe looked up, understanding dawning. Bait. Exactly. They spent the next 2 hours creating a convincing fake profile for a fictional student named Lily Park, complete with borrowed photos from a cousin of Zoe's who lived in Seattle and had agreed to the deception. They followed a carefully selected group of Oak Ridge High students, including several of Amelia's classmates, but not Amelia herself. Now what? Zoe asked when they were finished. Now, Amelia said, a hard edge to her voice that surprised even her, we start spreading rumors about my non-existent eating disorder. Zoe looked alarmed. Mel, that's the perfect bait, Amelia interrupted. Think about it. An eating disorder is exactly the kind of vulnerability a bully would exploit. And it's something my mother would be watching for. Why would she be watching for that specifically? Amelia sat on the edge of the bed, her energy suddenly depleting. Because she had one. When she was my age. She never talks about it, but my grandmother told me once. Said it was the worst time in their family's history, that they almost lost her. Understanding dawned on Zoe's face. And you think she's worried you might develop one too? Maybe. Or maybe she's projecting her own issues onto me. I don't know. Amelia rubbed her temples, where a headache was beginning to form. All I know is that if we start a rumor about me starving myself or purging, and then I start getting messages about it from my anonymous tormentor, then you'll know it's someone who heard the rumor and believed it, Zoe finished. But Mel, this is playing with fire. Eating disorder rumors can be really damaging, even if they're not true. I know. But I need answers, Zoe. I need to know why my own mother would do this to me. Amelia's voice cracked on the last words, the pain she'd been holding at bay finally seeping through. Zoe moved across the bed to wrap an arm around her shoulders. Okay, she said softly. We'll do it your way. But at the first sign this is getting out of hand, we pull the plug and tell your dad everything. Deal? Amelia nodded, leaning into her friend's embrace. Deal. They spent another hour crafting the perfect post for Lily Park's profile, vague enough to seem like genuine concern, specific enough to spread the intended rumor. Worried about that junior girl from chem class. The one with the author mom. She's lost so much weight lately, and I heard from KDM that she's been throwing up in the bathroom after lunch. Should I say something to the counselor? This feels gross, Zoe commented as Amelia hit post. It is gross, Amelia agreed. But not as gross as cyberbullying your own daughter. After Zoe left, Amelia sat at her desk, staring at her laptop screen. The fake post was already generating comments, mostly from people who didn't know her well enough to realize the rumor was false. A few expressed concern, others just replied with shocked emojis. The trap was set. Now all she had to do was wait. Chapter 4. The messages started exactly 43 minutes after dinner. Amelia had forced herself to act normal throughout the meal, picking at the Thai takeout her father had brought home in a rare display of family togetherness. Eleanor had been subdued, nursing a single glass of wine and contributing little to the conversation. James had filled the silence with hospital stories, seemingly oblivious to the tension crackling between his wife and daughter. When her phone pinged as she was finishing her homework, Amelia felt a perverse sense of satisfaction mixed with the familiar dread. Starving yourself now? Pathetic cry for attention. Like mother, like daughter, I guess. She'd been expecting it, but seeing the words still made her stomach clench. The casual cruelty was one thing, but the specific reference to like mother, like daughter, confirmed what she already suspected. This wasn't a random classmate or online troll. This was someone who knew about Eleanor's history with eating disorders. Amelia took a screenshot of the message, adding it to the growing folder of evidence on her laptop. Then she waited. If her theory was correct, more messages would follow. Sure enough, 15 minutes later, another notification appeared. Throwing up won't make you prettier. Or thinner. Just more pathetic than you already are. And then, just as she was about to turn off her light for the night. Does your father know you're purging? Maybe he'd finally pay attention to you if he did. Is that what this is about? That one hit too close to home, striking at the insecurities Amelia had been harboring about her father's emotional absence. She threw her phone across the room, watching with grim satisfaction as it bounced off her pillow and onto the floor. But the momentary release of anger quickly gave way to a cold, calculating focus. The trap had worked. The rumor had spread, and her tormentor had taken the bait. Now she needed the final piece of evidence, proof that the messages were coming from her mother's devices. Zoe had suggested installing spy software on Eleanor's phone or laptop, but Amelia had balked at that. It felt too invasive, too much like fighting fire with fire. Instead, she'd settled on a different approach. Tomorrow, she would confront her mother. Not with accusations, but with a carefully constructed scenario that would force Eleanor to reveal herself. Sleep was elusive that night, her mind racing with possibilities, rehearsing conversations, imagining outcomes. By the time her alarm went off, Amelia had dozed off for perhaps 2 hours, but her exhaustion was masked by adrenaline and determination. She dressed carefully again, this time choosing clothes that were slightly too large, enhancing the illusion that she'd lost weight. She applied makeup strategically, adding shadows under her eyes and cheekbones. Looking in the mirror, she had to admit the effect was convincing. She did look like someone in the early stages of an eating disorder. The house was quiet when she went downstairs. Her father had already left for an early surgery, and her mother was nowhere to be seen. A note on the counter informed her that Eleanor had gone to her editor's office for an emergency meeting about the manuscript. Perfect. That would give Amelia time to prepare. She ate a normal breakfast, ignoring the irony of fueling herself while planning to pretend she wasn't eating. Then she carefully set the stage. Dishes in the sink as if she'd made food but disposed of it, a protein bar wrapper in the trash but the bar itself hidden in her backpack, a glass with the remnants of what looked like water but was actually a dissolved vitamin tablet, something she could plausibly be using to stay healthy, while starving herself. At school, she continued the performance, picking at her lunch but not actually eating it, excusing herself to the bathroom afterward, staying just long enough that someone might wonder what she was doing in there. Zoe watched with growing concern. "This is getting out of hand," she whispered as they walked to their shared history class. "People are starting to believe it." "That's the point," Amelia replied, though she felt a twinge of guilt. "It won't be for long. Just until tomorrow." "What happens tomorrow?" "I confront her." Zoe stopped walking, pulling Amelia aside to a relatively quiet corner of the hallway. "Whoa, hold up. That wasn't the plan. We were supposed to gather evidence, then tell your dad." "This is gathering evidence," Amelia insisted. "I just need one more piece, her reaction when I call her out on it. And what if she denies it? What if she gets angry? What if—" Zoe broke off, her expression troubled. "Mel, if your mom is doing this, she's not. She's not well. Confronting her alone might not be safe." "She's my mother," Amelia said, but there was a tremor in her voice betraying her own uncertainty. "She wouldn't hurt me." "She's already hurting you," Zoe pointed out gently. "Just promise me you won't do it when you're alone in the house with her, okay? At least wait until your dad is home." Amelia nodded reluctantly. "Okay. I promise." But promises, she was learning, were easy to make and just as easy to break. When Amelia arrived home that afternoon, she found her mother's car in the driveway but the house eerily quiet. She called out as she entered, but received no response. Moving cautiously through the downstairs rooms, she finally spotted Eleanor through the French doors leading to the back patio. Her mother sat in one of the Adirondack chairs, a glass of wine in one hand, her phone in the other. She was typing something, her expression focused, almost feverish. A chill ran down Amelia's spine. Was she watching her right now? Composing another cruel message to send the moment Amelia checked her phone? As if on cue, she felt her phone vibrate in her pocket. Slowly, she pulled it out, her eyes never leaving her mother's form through the glass doors. "Skipping meals won't make Daddy love you more. Nothing will." Amelia's hand tightened around her phone, a surge of rage washing over her. Through the glass, she could see her mother set down her own phone, take a sip of wine, and stare out at the garden, her expression unreadable. The confrontation Amelia had carefully planned for tomorrow suddenly seemed impossibly far away. Her anger, her hurt, her bewilderment, all of it crystallized in this moment, demanding release. Before she could think better of it, she pushed open the French doors and stepped onto the patio. Eleanor turned, surprise flickering across her face. Amelia. I didn't hear you come in. I just got home, Amelia said, her voice steadier than she expected. What are you working on? Eleanor's hand moved subtly, tapping her phone screen to lock it. Just answering some emails from my publicist. The book release is being moved up again. Interesting timing, Amelia commented, taking a step closer. I just got a message. Oh. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, the picture of casual interest. From whom? I think you know. A beat of silence stretched between them. Eleanor's expression remained unchanged, but Amelia noticed the slight tightening of her fingers around her wineglass. I'm not sure what you mean. Eleanor stared at her daughter, momentarily frozen as the truth hung between them. Then her shoulders sagged, the carefully constructed facade crumbling. You weren't supposed to know, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Why? Amelia's voice cracked. Why would you do this to me? Eleanor sank back into her chair, looking suddenly older. I never meant to hurt you, she said, though the words rang hollow even to her own ears. It started after your father left. You looked so much like him, acted so much like him. Every time I saw you excelling, being happy without him. She trailed off, unable to meet Amelia's eyes. So you tried to break me? Amelia asked incredulously. Your own daughter? I was broken, Eleanor said, a tear sliding down her cheek. When Robert left us for that woman, when he stopped calling, stopped caring about us, about me, something inside me shattered. I watched you moving on, thriving, while I was drowning. That doesn't excuse what you did, Amelia said firmly, though her voice trembled. You're my mother. You were supposed to protect me from pain, not cause it. Eleanor nodded, her eyes downcast. I know. I know that now. I would tell myself it was just one message, just one little push to make you need me again. Then it became another, and another. Need you? Amelia echoed in disbelief. You made me feel worthless. Unlovable. I'm sorry, Eleanor whispered. I'm so sorry, Amelia. Silence fell between them. The garden around them had grown dark. I've been seeing someone, Eleanor finally said. A therapist. For 2 weeks now. After I sent that message about your birthday dinner and saw your face, I knew I'd gone too far. I knew something was wrong with me. Amelia stood very still, processing this new information. Does your therapist know about the messages? Eleanor shook her head. Not yet. I've been working up to it. Well, now you have something concrete to discuss at your next session, Amelia said coldly. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. I'm staying with Dad tonight. I already called him. Eleanor's head snapped up. You spoke to your father? He's been trying to reach me for months, Amelia revealed. But someone kept deleting his messages from my phone. Someone who had access to my passwords. Fresh shame washed over Eleanor's face. I can't be here right now, Amelia continued. I don't know when, or if, I'll be ready to talk again. Eleanor nodded, more tears falling. I understand. No, I don't think you do, Amelia said quietly. But maybe someday you will. She turned toward the house. I'm going to pack a bag. Amelia, Eleanor called as her daughter reached the French doors. I do love you. In my broken way, I always have. Amelia paused, her hand on the door handle. Love isn't supposed to hurt like this, Mom. As Amelia walked back through the house, her footsteps echoing in the silence, she felt something shift inside her, not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first fragile seed of understanding. The weight she'd carried for months felt different now. Not lighter, exactly, but more defined. Nameable. Her phone buzzed again as she reached the stairs. For a moment, panic flared, but then she saw her father's name on the screen. "I'm on my way," the message read. "You're not alone anymore." Amelia took a deep breath and began to climb the stairs. The confrontation she dreaded for so long was over, but the healing, for both her and her mother, had only just begun. Whatever came next, at least now she was walking in truth, the invisible wounds finally exposed to the light. The end. Thank you for listening and don't forget to subscribe.